Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to Conversation with Michael and Jermaine. How are you doing today, Michael?
I'm very well, thanks, Jay. And yourself?
Oh, that's good to hear. I'm well. I think a little allergy is happening today, but we're going to plow through. I just was thinking as we were waiting to start recording how exciting it is to be in a third episode of an idea that we had like so long ago. And literally, we're now recording our third episode. This is exciting.
It's an exciting feeling. Yes, that's exactly the emotion I would say fits the occasion.
Yeah.
Very excited. I feel good. I'm very happy to be able to do it. You know.
Yeah, and I think what was kind of cool about it, we've been getting some really great response. So thank you everyone who's been listening and commenting. Like I really appreciate it. Last episode was a really exciting one where we talked about vulnerability of getting rejected, and I kind of want to celebrate and highlight one of our comments that came up last week that I thought was really exciting before we go into today's. Hannah
Mhm.
Marie, she said, Hannah Mariah said she had a daughter that goes to UWI, which is University of West Indies in Jamaica. And I see this happening, which is the rejection of letters to her and a few of her friends in life from the parents' perspective. Having to reassure your child going through these rejection email is hard to experience. So thank you, Hannah Maria, for being open to our conversation and for finding space where you and your daughter can have, and her friends, can have a healthier conversation about feeling the space of rejection. Thank you so much.
Mhm. Okay. Let me join you first of all, Jay, in saying thanks to all who have taken the time to share this podcast with us. We really do appreciate you being there. And to Anna Marie, um, I thank her for watching and for also for sharing the concern with us. Um, when it comes to letters of rejection, I can, as a one parent to another, I can appreciate how she must feel.
Yeah,
And to watch your child go through these things is it can be it tugs at your heartstrings because I mean these are your children are very special. And so I quite appreciate how she must feel. However, I've been there too with my children and now grandchildren. And so how I normally approach it is this. A rejection letter is not it's a rejection of something you applied for, something you wanted to be a part of. And so therefore, what it means is that what I try to do is to look at the rejection and to get the points, especially if there are points as to why you're being not accepted for what you're applying for, and then look at them honestly to see if they're relevant.
yeah,
Okay? Because there may be some truth there that we need to address. And if once we can address those truths, then we can actually, go back, reapply, or try something else or try a different approach in order to make it happen. So once you get through get over the emotions, okay, fine. Let me look at the rejection. What were they saying as to why I was not accepted? And look at those honestly to see if there's any validity in them. And if there is, then how do you fix that? And then wheel, as they say, and come again.
come again. Awesome. I love this way because today when we're planning, what we're going to talk about, and we talk about rejection and everything else, there's also another extension of one of the big overwhelming feelings. Recently, I know in social media world and also in just daily lives, we tend to lose people that are important to us through death and transitions. And our kind of today's conversations are going to be around that space of healing through transitions of death and experiences. And I was looking at the actor Malcolm who was in the Cosby Show, and in a lot of ways grew up with I grew up generationally with him, and so in a lot of ways he's a contemporary. And I watched how social media navigated the loss of someone that somehow felt like an extension of your family. And I know we've shared friends and spaces together where we, in the last recent year or so, a few years, we're realizing that friends or family or colleagues are transitioning through death and navigating that. COVID was a big one for me, watching it happen in multiple ways and multiple people close to me that had passed away. And I want to kind of start opening up a space of a conversation around how have you processed this in your life before? Are there ways, are there tools, are there patterns that you found have helped a coping tool? So I want to kind of start with the first question. What is something that you remember from an event of a funeral or a death that brought unexpected humor to you in a moment when you never expected humor to happen?
Well, I think the operative word there is unexpected, because you never know when it's going to happen. Um, the humor usually comes up in moments of grief, when you remember something that the person who's no longer there said.
Mm,
A conversation you might have had with them, a moment when you were engaging with them in a particular place or time, and then something happens. So that's usually when the humor comes back. Or when someone who, if you're around others who knew the dearly departed, then they might have said something, and so you're sharing lighter moments, and then that would have come up. I don't know that I've had any situations where it has just sort of appeared other than that,
mm.
you
I
know?
can tell you one. I
Mhm.
was there with
Yeah,
you.
but I'd
I
be
was there
interested to
with
hear. What
you.
about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, well, we shared a mutual friend. Well, it was your cousin and a friend that you introduced me to,
Yeah,
Tommy.
Tommy, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember when we were at his memorial, his sister went up and gave a beautiful speech. And in speaking, she said, Tommy said to her, if I ever pass away, to say this at my funeral, me dead to Ras.
Okay, so
And I remember everyone in the congregation cracking up. She had to turn to the pastor and say, I'm sorry, I don't want to be disrespectful in your church. But Tommy said if I ever die, to come up at my funeral and say, me dead to Ras.
yeah.
Um,
But the pastor was not Jamaican, so he didn't understand the reference to Ras.
yes. But all the Jamaicans in the audience were literally on the floor
Yeah,
because
yeah, I remember the moment.
and also
Yeah,
because we knew who Tommy was, it was so him to
it was
come and upstage himself at his own
right.
funeral.
Okay, so it harks back to what the question you asked me, right? It was something that he actually said, when he was alive, that able to reflect on, because we don't remember time per se. We remember moments in time.
Mm,
And that was a moment where Tommy is always, I mean, it's something I've heard him say several times, and I could remember how he said it, when he said it, where he said it. So right away, it triggered those memories, and it really caused a laugh, you know what I mean? Because it was funny.
it was
Okay.
funny.
Hmm.
So now thinking about, and we in so many beautiful moments, I'm realizing now as we're talking about grief, seemingly then one of the first things you could do when you find losing somebody is to find a community of people that collectively knew this person together, to
Hmm.
share memories, to share experiences, to share reflections of this lived life. I recently had a moment where, and I shared with you about it. A neighbor who became a really good friend of mine, who was older, he was 90 years old, and his wife and I and him became good friends. And he recently passed away about a month or two ago. And I did something I never did before, which in helping her in that moment, waiting for the paramedics and the morgue to come and pick him up, I helped her because the family was also on their way. She wanted to make sure he was being honored in his final moments so beautifully. I helped her change him and get him dressed and get him ready for the morgue to come pick him up. And it was I've never done that before. I was honored to do it, but it was such a numbing experience. Because if you ever find yourself in that moment, it is this moment where I like to think human reasoning and rationale kind of goes out. And it's a moment that you can't even intellectually process. You just have to experience the moment. And it made me really reflect on love, life, who would help in that situation do that for you in a loving way to make sure that your final moments are honored in the most loving possible way. And it really gave me a perspective on how are we loving the people who are in our lives right now, presently.
Mm.
And it was a reflection on what does the lesson of death, what can the lesson of death teach us?
Well, one of the things that I always that death reminds me of is the uncertainty of life. And over the course of my life, Jay, I've had to deal with the death of several persons, friends, family members, parents, etc. Okay? And I've learned a long time ago that it's a reminder, it always reminds me of how uncertain life is and unpredictable life can be. And so, therefore, I've taken that and I've always, and this is not to be morbid, I've taken that as a very instructive lesson. So I say I walk with death on one shoulder. Like some persons have a parrot. I have a death there. And here's why I do that. It reminds me, because usually we're not reminded until it happens to someone we know. So that for me is a reminder by having that there of the uncertainty of life. And so what I do as a result of that reminder is to maximize my time with the people I love.
I love that. How I look at it, because I
I
take it
don't take the things and time for granted.
for granted.
Exactly.
What I love about that reflection, because my perspective on it, I'm gonna kind of ask you a little bit about how you got there too, because my perspective on it, because I've seen death up so close with friends and close ones, my perspective on it is death. I've made friends with death. That's how I say it in my experience, because it is one of those relationships in your life that is always there. Death is an inevitable for all of us, and it is really, you sometimes mute yourself to look at it simply because of the anxieties of life, of sometimes religious spaces perspective on death. But I do believe if you can allow yourself to look at it, it genuinely also gets to that space of you're talking about, of honoring life. Losing somebody like, you say you lost your parents and friends. I mean, I don't know if you can quantify which one feels harder or not, but what's the difference? I'm blessed right now in my life to have my parents still with me in this plane. What's the difference? Is there a difference between losing a parent and losing a friend experientially?
I don't think there's a difference, Jay, in terms of the emotion of grief or the intensity of it. I think it depends on how we think of death. I I wouldn't say that I've made friends with death, but I certainly have made peace with it. I accept the emotions, the emotion of grief that comes with death. Not in the sense of trying to get rid of it or push it away as soon as I start to experience it, but I experience it in such a way that I honor my feelings. I don't need permission. I'm at a place in my life now where I really don't need permission from anyone to to grieve. You know, um, I must know what I'm experiencing, and it's really up to me to be able to respond, to relate to the emotion of grief. So, to answer the question you were asking about, do you feel I lost an uncle, I lost a friend, Tommy, recently. I've just lost another friend in New York 2 days ago. And I still feel the same the same degree of emotion. Now, if it were, I think maybe the closer the person happens to be to you, like for example, a child, a parent. Yeah, I think the closer the individuals are to you, I think that would be it would reflect how the degree of the emotion you feel.
Yeah, and I mean, there's certain things that we do we practice. Like I know in Jamaica, one of the things that happened when my grandmother had died was a physical practice of shifting the entire house, move all the furniture around, shift the entire space, as a way of, I think, symbolically letting the spirit know that they no longer should be in comfortably in this realm. They can go on to wherever they need to go on to. That's how I understood that practice. There's also so there's
Sorry,
ritual.
you said this is something you did. You shifted the furniture, or your
My
parents?
mother did. My mother did,
She shifted
and
around the, and the
yeah,
thinking behind that was
well, to want to shift the energy of the space, also to free the spirit from knowing that this is no longer where they reside and it's okay. And it's also a physical way for you to, when you walk into the space, it's okay for the space to look differently. And so it's a physical shift that also becomes experiential. There is, and what I do appreciate about, and I, as a writer, as a creative, a lot of my works write about ritual and ritualistic practices as a folkloric artist.
mm,
And the folklore and the rituals around death culturally. I mean, I'd love to have somebody who listening to this podcast who at this point I want to remind you to like and subscribe, follow us and like comments. And I'd
mhm.
love to hear what are some of the different ritualistic practices that people in different cultures use, because one of the things that's coming up is emotional things, but there are some very practical things that I find that in Jamaican culture, for example, making sure you shift the host and you washed all the clothes, and you might, of course, you go to the night, morning, the dead yard, you have people coming over, the killing of goat or like food. And there's always these rituals around honoring, but I think a lot of the rituals, and the rituals come with music and dance. I know in much more contemporary Jamaica, the traditional night has been shifted into more of a dance hall setting. But I do believe the practice in itself is to invite you to dance, to physically release the trauma of losing the person
Yeah.
through the body.
Okay. So anything that anyone does to cope with that emotion, I don't have any arguments. So, I mean, whatever you do to relieve the emotion you're feeling, or to help you to work through your feelings, that's entirely up to you. Um, what I try to do is because the question I would ask is, when you do that ritual, what is it you're trying to achieve?
What I see people do, because
What
I've
is it?
recently
Yeah.
walked with a friend of mine through a memorial, and a lot of it is to almost, how do you last send somebody off that you loved? How do you show them that, or how do you show up for them in death? And I think it goes back to the conversation we're talking about showing up. Really make sure that they know in life, those scatter roses after I'm gone idea. Showing up in life for them in a really powerful way. But I think the ritual after is to bring communities together, and you're going to find the multiple layers of. I remember the first regret I felt was tied into my grandmother's death. Like a few days before, I was walking past her house as a high school student with some friends, and I saw her sitting down. I was like, "Oh, I'll see my grandmother later. I don't want to stop." And like, I'm hanging out with my friends, being a teenager. And my grandmother was in a wheelchair at the time too. So I was also like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to introduce my grandmother, my high school friends to my grandmother in a wheelchair." I remember thinking that. And it was not even a week afterwards she had died. And I just remembered what felt like a missed opportunity to say a final last, whatever it was. And at that funeral, I was so heavy and I cried. And, when I shared that story with my mom and my sister a few years after, they said, one, you're a teenager. That's what a teenager is supposed to do. And two, you allowed yourself to grieve in a healthy way and find peace and space with that. So I think it goes back to how you show up for the person in life. You often see people come in the moment when death happens if they never showed up in life. The grief seems to sit in this guttural regret space,
Mhm.
and that can be hard to process. And that's where the ritualistic space of coming together with community can help to buffer some of that space.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions you just opened up there, because a lot of times what I find is, going back to what I said earlier, I am reminded of the uncertainty of life, and so therefore I try to maximize my time with the people who I love and people who are closest to me. Okay, now I try not to take things for granted. we will never be able to fulfill a lot of the things that we would like to do because it's just not possible in life. That's not possible. So if maybe you should have, for using your example, maybe you should have stopped when grandma, you thought she needed you, or you could have checked with her, kind of thing. Okay, so you didn't do that. But then to torture yourself because you didn't do that. I mean, if you knew she was going to die, you probably would have. You know, probably you would have, right?
Yeah,
But you didn't know. And there's no way you could have known that.
yeah.
Okay? If you were neglecting her all your life, then that would be a different thing.
That's different, right? And that's what it's funny because I was having a conversation with my brother who recently lost a friend, and it was that space of, oh my goodness, I thought I had more time. Oh my goodness, I wish I had. And I think that can be where the grief cycle becomes destructive,
Mhm.
or can become destructive, where you live in this shoulda, woulda. I wish I'd called them. I wish I had spent more time. I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done that. And because that is such a wish that can never ever be fulfilled after that moment is past, it really is. And you said something beautiful at the top of the program that I wrote down that I love: instructive lessons that you gained from the lived experience of navigating so many transitions in your life. It's almost, if you're willing to look at it and listen to it, you kind of get an instructive, some instructions of how to be present, instructions of how to navigate relationships. Like, and but also we come from a culture, and I noticed in Jamaica, at least how I experienced growing up in Jamaica,
Mhm.
was affectionate culture isn't so, it wasn't so common to say I love you to somebody, to say I care about you. Oftentimes it's not being said. So how do you show them that they're loving before that moment comes when you can't say to them anymore, I love you?
Okay, so again, I go back to what I was saying earlier. Because of the unpredictable nature of life,
Hmm.
I strive to do those things to and for the people I love, to create those moments to demonstrate my love, because love, again, as I said, it's a verb, it's action. All right. And so therefore that's what I try to do in life. Now, I also want to make a quick point here, and I think it's very relevant, because when we think of grief, we think of usually the next thought is death. But we also grieve the loss of a friendship, the loss of a lover, okay, the loss of a job. We can grieve a lot of things.
Yeah, and it's funny. And I love that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I love that we talk, because I think the thing is, if we can learn to grieve healthily, all the
Mhm.
different layers of grief as we experience grief in life,
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
one major, I was talking to a friend of mine recently about dating and being in relationships. And one of the things that I learned in my last few years of the book I was reading, I can't remember it now. I'll put it in the comments later on, when we put this podcast up. But it was pretty much talking about, you do not have to be in a romantic relationship to practice the skills of relationship. So you can practice
Sorry, you
communication,
don't have to be in a romantic relationship.
to practice the skills that's going to be required to sustain a romantic relationship, like communication, like trust. And you can practice these skills with people in your life, like friends, um, co-workers, family members. You can practice how to communicate and how to be present. I think the same of with grief in this concept, in this moment, where allow yourself to grieve the things in your life that deserve grieving. Because I think sometimes people don't know, I didn't realize, let me put it on myself. I didn't realize,
Give me an example of what
yes,
yeah, what you're explaining.
I didn't realize that sometimes when you leave a relationship that you have to allow yourself to grieve the thing. That just moving forward and being like, I'm okay, can actually not be a healthy way of, like, allowing yourself to grieve the fact that you lost a friend. Because I think losing a friendship is one of the biggest things that for me I found to be really difficult. Somebody that you've spent so much time and energy with, and friendship, death and transition breakups can really be really difficult. And using the word grief as a part of processing it, I think is helpful to navigate different types of grieving.
Well, it's the death of a relationship,
It's the
right?
death of a
As
relationship.
opposed to the death of an individual, it's the death of a relationship, right? So,
Yeah.
something has ended, something has been severed, the connection is no longer there. All right. And one of the questions I've done a lot of thinking on is, why does grief hurt so much?
Hmm.
And I think the best answer I've come up with is that grief is love with no place to go. Think of grief. I mean, as an example of that, and Michael Holgate, he would appreciate this as someone who's very steeped in music.
Michael,
Think of
Michael Sean Harris.
hmm?
Michael Sean Harris, our dear.
Michael Sean Harris. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
Michael Holgate, another brilliant mind. But
So
in this,
no, 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 yeah,
we're talking about Michael Sean
yeah. I
Harris.
was talking with him recently. Yeah,
Yes.
think of it this way: grief is like hearing your favorite music, a favorite piece of music that you shared with someone you loved. Okay,
Hmm.
whether they're no longer, whether they've died or they're still around, but the relationship has died, and you're hearing the music, you're experiencing the emotions. You want to dance. You can imagine what you used to do together when you heard that piece of music together, and all of the memories that come flooding in. But the person is missing.
Mm.
The person is not there. Okay, so this is why I say, for me, it's grief is love with no place to go, because you can't dance with a person, you can't communicate with a person. All you have are the memories.
I never heard it put that way before, and it's making. I mean, I kind of, yeah, I like how that
And
feels.
that's why it hurts for me. That's why it hurts so much.
Yeah, I like the way that feels. I mean, because one of the things it made me think about just now is the fact that what you are also remembering is your experience of the experience.
Mhm.
And so, one of the things that I've come to recognize as I mature and do the work on my own to like understand all these layers of emotional states is that if you can find peace and healing, those experiences that you have are still yours. You don't have to release those anymore. You can go, okay, we may not be friends. This person may not be in my life anymore. I think of a piece I'd written recently. I'm still working on a piece called Standpipe, and there's a monologue in it where a character talks about to lose a father, but he never had a relationship with his father. But he heard his father is terminally ill, and he doesn't know how to feel.
He
And
doesn't know how to feel.
doesn't know how to feel because I'm like, he's like, should I have healed the relationship with him before he died? But we never had a relationship. And I wrote that monologue based on some of my own experiences, but also some of my conversations with my friends around losing parents in their lives that they never really had a connection with.
All right.
And I've known people who made decisions not to go to their parents' funeral or friends' so there are all these multiple layers. But when I look back at what you're talking about, this like, where do I put this love? Where do I put this thing?
Yeah.
it, it,
So,
it does feel like it's hitting against this.
so Jay, let me ask you this: when the person say, I don't know how to feel, um, if you're checking in, if you're in touch with your emotions, it's not a question of how to feel, but if you're checking in with your emotions, you must know what you're feeling.
I don't know if that's true. I think there's a numbingness. There's a numbness sometimes that is just a numbness,
Hmm.
and I
But
think we can
okay,
bring up.
so you're feeling numb.
Okay, fair. Okay, Michael, be smart. Be smart.
No, you feel no, not
But
numb.
you're
You
right.
see,
You're
look,
right. You're
it's
right.
like when you
You're right.
say to somebody how you feeling, and say, I'm not feeling anything again. It could be feeling calm.
Yeah,
You just put the name to what you're feeling. You're feeling numb. Numb is an emotion.
numb is emotion. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay, so therefore, and when you're in that emotion, it's hard to kind of think or process.
yeah.
But by the same token,
Sometimes
that's what you're feeling. So how do you now work through that numbness, or you allow the numbness to kind of dampen a bit, and then you now start to think?
I think that's a neg that, and I love that. That's kind of how we're wrapping it up. Is to allow yourself the space to have the space, because I
Mhm.
do believe that sometimes when these moments happen, and I don't know if the work world that we live in right now give time off for bereavement, but I do believe that there is a space to allow yourself to sit still with what's happening. You lost somebody that was very, very important to you. There is the immediacy of family members or friends going, when is the funeral? When is the thing? How do we honor you? And you get, and I watched my friend recently, my neighbor, who had to do that with her husband, and she was trying to just grieve a really long, lifelong love and relationship, having to try to plan and organize the memorial while families asking all
Yeah.
the questions.
Okay.
And
Before we run out of time, Jay, very
yeah,
quickly,
mhm,
one of the things I would really love for us to touch on, albeit briefly, is what is the what are some of the things that people say to you in a moment of grief that you wish they just never said?
I can't think of anything for myself right now directly, but I can think of a friend of mine who told me an experience where he had just lost his mom, and Mother's Day had come up shortly at the church that he was going to go to. And somebody walked up to him, and her first thing she said was, "Oh, so we're missing someone today, aren't we?" And it was such a jarring, numbing experience where the way the person was trying to comfort that moment of the first Mother's Day without his mother was such a just reminding him that she's not here, and he was really upset by it. So that's the first thing that could jump out at me in that context. But I can't think of anything specifically beyond that.
Yeah, okay. So people have a way of saying, "Oh, they're in a better place," or they're with God,
Mhm.
or look, you're strong. You soon come out of it. They say any number of things, and I often wonder. I think they really mean well, but it's not received well.
What are some of the things that could be
Uh,
said as we wrap up today? And I
yeah, I
think the conversation
think
can continue. What are some of the things that we can do, not just with ourselves, but with people who might be experiencing grief in our lives?
yeah,
How are some of the ways we can make sure we're being healthy, supportive system?
and I think very simply, you know, just know that I'm here for you. Just know that I'm here for you. There's nothing I can do to take away the pain or relieve the pain in any way. But if you need to reach out, just know that I'm here. I think that's, and you don't have to say anything. Sometimes a hug, holding a hand on a shoulder, an embrace.
And I
But try
found,
to avoid all these things that you have to say because there's nothing you can say
say, I
that is
found though,
going here.
culturally, what is helpful is to bring some food to the person.
Mhm.
Bring some food.
Find out what they might need as yeah, how can I help?
How can I help? How can
You
I help?
ask the person. Don't try to tell them.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's to listen to where they're coming.
How can I help?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay? And just know that if at the moment they don't have a request, please know that I'm here for you and I'm holding a good thought for you.
And on
You
that
don't
wonderful
have
note, thank you, Michael. Find community that is there for you in the same way that this conversation and my relationship with my dear friend Michael has been there for me for a really long time. Thanks for listening today. Leave your comments and thoughts.
yeah. Again, as always, it's been a joy for me, okay? It doesn't matter what the subject is. It's been a joy because I'm able to share, and I'm really hoping that something that we said today would have resonated with somebody who's listening. And please feel free to check in with us and give us your comments. We'd love to hear from you. Okay,
Thanks,
so
Michael.
until next time.
Until next time.
Yeah.